It was just before noon when she stepped into the sleek, glass-walled lobby of the city's most exclusive private bank. Polished floors, echoing footsteps, and the faint scent of cologne and espresso filled the air. Every movement inside was choreographed, clients greeted by name, assistants gliding past in heels that clicked in perfect rhythm, and security men who looked more like silent sculptures than actual people. She didn't belong, at least not by their standards. Her coat was simple, not tailored. Her shoes were clean but unbranded. No designer handbag dangled from her wrist. No entourage trailed behind her. Just a soft leather folder in one hand and calm, deliberate steps as she approached the front desk. "I have an appointment," she said, voice steady. The woman behind the counter glanced at her briefly, once over, down, dismissive. "Name?" "Amira Carter." The receptionist blinked, hesitated a second too long, then quickly typed into her screen. The appointment was real, but the look in her eyes said what she didn't. This can't be her. "Yes, well," she stalled, clearly uncertain. "Please take a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." As Amira turned to sit, she noticed the subtle stares from across the marble floor. Two bankers in sharp suits whispered behind their laptops. One chuckled, another adjusted his tie and looked her up and down, not out of interest but out of amusement. "She probably came in to ask about a savings account," one murmured, "or file a complaint about ATM fees." They laughed. She didn't flinch. She simply sat, crossed her legs, and opened the folder in her lap. No one noticed the name on the documents inside. No one saw the signature at the bottom. But they would. Very soon, they'd learn they hadn't just laughed at a simple woman. They had laughed at the future co-owner of everything around them. While the bankers returned to their screens and the receptionist resumed her casual scrolling, Amira remained still, calm, poised, patient. She had no desire to force respect. The kind she valued was the kind that revealed itself when the room finally recognized the truth. She sat in silence for nearly 20 minutes. During that time, two men in custom-tailored suits were ushered past her, greeted with warm handshakes and escorted directly upstairs to the executive level. A woman in a silk blouse received complimentary coffee without even asking. And yet, Amira, whose name was clearly in the system, waited, unacknowledged. Eventually, a young associate in a slim navy suit approached her. His expression was courteous but guarded, as if trying to decide whether he should speak slowly or call security. "Ma'am, I believe you're here for a consultation?" he asked. "Yes," she said, standing. It was scheduled under Amira Carter. He nodded uncertainly and gestured for her to follow. "Right this way." Instead of taking her to a meeting room or a senior advisor, he led her toward the far corner of the floor, an empty glass cubicle, barely furnished, usually reserved for low-tier clients or walk-ins without appointments. She noticed. She said nothing. As he gestured for her to take a seat, he awkwardly pulled out a tablet and began with a rehearsed line. "So, what brings you to Apex Holdings today? Are you looking to open a new account, or—" Before he could finish, she calmly opened her folder and slid a stack of documents across the table. "These are revised equity acquisition agreements," she said, her tone unwavering. "As of noon today, a holding company under my name has secured majority shares in Apex Holdings' core banking division." The young associate blinked. Amira continued. "The transaction was finalized this morning. You'll likely receive the official notice within the hour, but I thought it was polite to come in person." The associate's face drained of color. He looked at her, then at the papers again, then slowly reached for the intercom button beside him. I need to get someone senior." Amira provided time. He come his weekend. But she wasn't done. "One more thing," she added, voice calm as ever. "Kindly let the gentleman near the window, the one who joked about my ATM fees, know that I'll be reviewing internal behavior policies, as his employer." Then she smiled. Not the kind of smile meant to gloat, but the kind that reminded the room she had never needed their permission to walk through that door. Upstairs, chaos was beginning to simmer beneath the surface. Executives received alerts from their legal and finance teams, emails with subject lines like, "Urgent, ownership transfer confirmed, and immediate compliance required." The chairman, who had been in a quiet strategy session with partners, stared at the screen in front of him for several stunned seconds before pushing back from the table.
"Who authorized this?" he barked. His assistant hesitated. "It was cleared through the holding company last week, sir. We didn't know who was behind it until the documents came through just now." "Who is behind it?" he snapped. The assistant handed him a single sheet of paper with 2 names. Primary investor, Amelia Holdings. Managing partner, Amira Carter. The room went silent. "Carter!" one of the partners said slowly. "As in, Nicholas Carter?"
The chairman's expression dropped. Everyone in that room knew the name. Nicholas Carter was the billionaire investor behind multiple global tech firms, a media conglomerate, and now apparently the controlling interest in one of the country's oldest banks. And his wife, the quiet woman they had dismissed downstairs, wasn't just involved. She was now the one with the power to hire, fire, and rewrite every rule they'd built the bank around. Back on the ground floor, Amira was still seated in the glass cubicle, sipping water offered nervously by a different associate. The original one, the man who had assumed she was there to open a savings account, had retreated somewhere into the back offices, visibly shaken. When the elevator dinged and the bank's executive director stepped onto the floor, a visible shift occurred. Employees straightened up, phones were lowered, even the receptionist rose to her feet, sensing something unusual. The director approached Amira's table slowly, then offered a cautious but respectful smile. "Mrs. Carter," he said, extending a hand, "I believe congratulations are in order. And apologies as well for the delay in greeting you properly." Amira stood and accepted his handshake, her posture graceful, her eyes unwavering. "I'm not here for congratulations," she said softly. "I'm here to understand the culture of what I've just invested in." The director nodded quickly. "Of course. We'd be honored to take you upstairs and walk you through the current structure. You'll find we're very open to changes that support your vision." She didn't move yet. Her eyes drifted around the room, past the receptionist who had hesitated, past the smirking banker who had now gone conspicuously missing, past every single person who had once looked at her as though she didn't matter. "You'll find," she said calmly, "that my vision starts with making sure people are never laughed out of a lobby again." Then she turned, walking toward the elevator with the director trailing beside her, while behind her, the entire bank began to realize that their balance sheets weren't the only things being recalculated. Upstairs, the boardroom doors opened slowly, and Amira stepped inside with quiet authority. The room fell into an immediate hush, not out of courtesy but discomfort. These were the very people who, just days ago, wouldn't have paused to glance at her. Now their posture stiffened, their expressions carefully neutral. A few stood to greet her, late gestures of respect they hoped would mask their earlier ignorance. The chairman approached with a forced smile. "Mrs. Carter, we're honored. Please have a seat." She nodded once and sat at the head of the long, polished table, her husband's empty chair beside her. Nicholas wasn't there because she didn't need him to be. She placed her folder on the table, opened it calmly, and began flipping through the bank's public policies and internal reports that had been prepared in advance. There were no opening jokes, no pleasantries, no wasted words. Just a slow, deliberate silence as she took her time reviewing the systems they had built. Systems that excluded people who didn't walk in wearing a label or wielding a name. "I've been watching this institution for a long time," she said finally, voice low but firm. "It has history, influence, but it also has habits that have gone unchecked." The CFO leaned forward cautiously. "We've always strived to maintain a premium experience for our clientele." "Premium," Amira repeated, glancing around. No one replied. "I was dismissed in your lobby for wearing a coat that wasn't designer, for not arriving with a personal banker beside me. I was invisible to people who should have been trained to see value beyond appearance, and you expect me to believe that experience is rare?" The director cleared his throat. "It was a mistake, an unfortunate misjudgment." "No," she said evenly. "It was a pattern." She leaned back slightly, folding her hands together. This isn't about revenge. It's about reconstruction. From her folder, she pulled out a new proposal, one that outlined immediate changes to internal policy, staff retraining, inclusive client outreach, anonymous review systems, and an internal mentorship program led by diverse executives. She didn't ask for approval. She simply placed the documents on the table. Effective immediately. The board members stared, a few nodding slowly. The chairman, to his credit, didn't protest. Amira stood and gathered her folder. I didn't come to be celebrated. I came to correct a culture that believes power looks a certain way. As she left the room, the silence behind her wasn't just compliance, it was awe. Because for the first time, the people who once ran the bank felt what it meant to be led by someone who didn't chase applause, only results. In the days that followed, word of Amira's takeover spread far beyond the corridors of Apex Holdings. News outlets ran headlines like, "From Ignored to In Charge," and "Bank Reborn Under the Quiet Power of Amira Carter." On social media, she became a symbol, not of vengeance, but of transformation. Thousands of women and men shared their own stories of being judged by appearance, class, or silence. Her name, once unfamiliar in the public eye, now stood for something deeper than wealth. Inside the bank, change was swift and visible. Gone were the stiff formalities at the front desk. New training sessions began, mandatory and deeply personal. Staff were taught to recognize unconscious bias, to listen before assuming, to serve without scanning labels. It wasn't just surface-level rebranding, it was a re-education of how value was measured. Amira didn't micromanage. She visited quietly, walking through departments with a calm presence that made people sit straighter and speak clearer. Employees began to greet every visitor with the same level of care they might have once reserved for someone wearing a tailored suit. She noticed the difference, and more importantly, so did the clients. One morning, the same receptionist who had looked her up and down weeks ago stopped her with a hesitant voice. "Mrs. Carter, I just wanted to say I've learned more in these 2 weeks than I did in my last 2 years. Thank you for not walking away." Amira paused, offered a kind nod, and replied, "Thank you for staying to grow." Downstairs, new artwork lined the walls, photographs of diverse communities, quotes about humility, intelligence, and resilience. In one image, a woman in a simple coat stood facing the reflection of a grand building, eyes full of quiet strength. It was subtle, uncaptioned, but unmistakable. Clients noticed. Other banks noticed. Inquiries increased. The market responded. But Amira never sought the spotlight. When journalists requested interviews, she declined them. When asked to speak at industry panels, she referred others. Women in finance who had been overlooked for far too long. Her message was clear. Change didn't need a stage, it needed action, and she had already taken the first steps. Months later, the transformation at Apex Holdings wasn't just evident, it was legendary. What had once been a cold, elite institution was now praised as one of the most forward-thinking financial entities in the country. Clients from all walks of life came through its doors, feeling seen, respected, and heard. The very walls that had echoed with exclusion now radiated a quiet dignity that matched the woman behind it all. Amira never asked for credit. She simply kept moving, reviewing policies, mentoring new talent, and listening. Always listening. Not to the noise, but to the undercurrents, the patterns people missed because they were too loud to hear them. Her strength was never in dominance. It was in the precision of her presence. One morning, she stood near the front of the bank, watching a young girl walk in with her father. The little one looked around in awe at the glass ceiling and the warm reception desk, clutching a piggy bank in both hands. The receptionist knelt to greet her with a smile, not patronizing, genuine. Amira smiled to herself. This was what she had wanted all along, not a throne, not revenge, but a shift. A ripple effect that changed how people were treated before anyone asked who they were. Later that evening, Nicholas joined her in the rooftop garden of their home. The city lights flickered below them like stars scattered across glass. He poured her a cup of tea and sat beside her without speaking. They often didn't need words, but tonight, he glanced at her and smiled. "You've done something incredible," he said quietly. She shook her head. "I just held up a mirror. They did the rest." He looked at her, proud. "They never would have done it without you." She watched the lights, her hands warming around the cup. Maybe, but now, they know better.
And that was the truth.
She had walked into a building where no one saw her worth. She had been laughed at, sidelined, and dismissed. But without raising her voice or seeking revenge, she had changed the system that tried to shrink her. Because real power isn't loud. It doesn't need a title, a brand, or a spotlight. Sometimes it walks in quietly, sits down politely, and rewrites the rules without ever asking for permission.